Hey, how's it going? My name is Hector Gonzalez. Um, so I want to give a shout out to Overcome Media for inviting me to come out and share my testimony. So yeah, it started. I think grew up in Longmont, Colorado. It's a pretty small town. Well, it used to be a small town. Um, just about 40 miles north of the Denver area. Um, and I think dad left probably like I was about 3 years old. And it was just me and my mom and my sister. Um, and my mom, she's from Mexico, so she always had kind of like low paying jobs, so she was always working, and it'd always just be me and my sister home. Went like that for a few years until my mom had met my brother's dad. I think he was from the area, so anyway, they hooked up and he ended up moving in, and that's when things really started to change for me. And my sister. He was, I feel like I think he pretty much hated me. Um, or he sure acted like he did anyway. He sure treated me pretty bad. My sister too. My sister ended up splitting to live with our aunt. Um, and there goes another person gone that I cared about. I used to always like wonder like why like my dad left. I used to always ask my mom, why did my dad leave? And then is my sister leaving? And it's like, why did she leave too? It's like I used to I don't know if it was me or what it was, but that's how I felt growing up. Just felt alone. And on top of that, with the stepdad in the picture now, like he had a pretty hard way of disciplining. I felt like when I was little, it was pretty much for nothing. I think it was just to kind of just treat me bad. So grew up going through that stuff. Getting abused, and I kind of just after a while it didn't hurt anymore, and I think he hated me more, and he was it angered him that it didn't even hurt. I wouldn't even cry anymore, so he started to do it more and more. And after a while I didn't care. I started going to stealing stuff from the store. I think I was like 12 years old when I got caught the first time. And you get took home in a cop car back then. And and I remember I got whooped pretty good that time. But I didn't care. I was starting to become just, I guess, cold to it. I didn't numb to it. I guess I didn't feel it. Um, growing up, and going through all that time, like I remember I was like a really good student. Straight A student. Nobody paid attention though. It was like my mom was always working. I was like getting honor roll, and I was, they do the honor roll lunches. She never show up, and I started to say, well, you know what? Keep trying. Nobody pays attention. So I remember walking home from school. I started going to a new school. I think it was like sixth grade. There was these guys. They used to see me walking home every day, and they'd beat me up, and I'd go home, and mom would be like, "What happened to you?" I was like, "Well, nothing. Nothing. I fell off my bike or whatever." And then the next day, I remember they do it again, and the next day they do it again. And she's like, "No, something's going on." But I never would tell her. So I remember it was like a week, like getting beat up every day. These guys were like, "Hey, man, you're stupid, or you keep coming through here." It's like, "No, I don't know any other way home. I just, I'm not. I just moved here." And they were like, "Well, you want to start hanging out with us? We're this gang, this and that." And I was like, "Well, yeah, sure." I didn't. I was like, "Come on, I guess you can't beat them. You join them." So I started running around with these guys. They were all older than me. Started, smoking weed and drinking beers, and I was a runaway at that point. I didn't go back home, and nobody ever went looking for me. I think the school was the one that eventually went looking for me. And when, they found me, they, they said, you got to go to school. You need to go to, you need to go to school. I ended up going back home and catching another beating at that point. Like, I was like, I tried fighting back, and I remember my stepdad had, he beat me up pretty good. He beat me up like a man that time. And, my mom ended up kicking him out. And after that, I stood home because it's just me and my mom. Um, but I started drinking a lot. Like, I was drinking pints of 100 proof, alcohol. And, I drank a lot from my age. I was like 13, 14 years old. Well, I think when I first got into a lot of trouble was around this time. I got a hold of a rifle that was in the house that was my stepdad's and started shooting it all drunk. And my little brothers were there. Like, I had two little brothers already at this point, and I could have shot one of them or something. Anyway, that's when I first got like into serious trouble. I, got in, cops called and went to jail and ended up in a treatment center, a residential treatment center for like 6 months. And they were going to ship me out to Texas to live with family out there because my mom didn't know how to deal with me at that point. And I ran, and I think I stood out uh, with these guys. We were robbing houses. I'm just doing all kinds of bad stuff, robbing houses, stealing cars, you name it. And ended up getting caught, and I ended up with all these charges. And that's where it started. I was always in jail, juvenile jail, from 13, 14 years old till I was 18, in and out, like boot camps. I went to 2 boot camps in a row, and I was like, I did good in that environment though. I did good. I'd get good grades, and I was like super like physically fit, running 5 miles a day. And um at that point I felt invincible. Like, I'm going through all those years. Like, I was, you're in there, you get in a lot of fights, and I thought I was untouchable going into my adult years. Um, I got into some, I didn't really ever do drugs through all that time. I was always locked up. But as I remember turning 18, I got mixed up with this guy that, he's like, hey, you want to start selling dope? And it's like, yeah, this is what I need to do. This is what I need to do. So I started selling drugs. And I never had done those drugs. But this my kid's mom, who I had linked up with around that time, she's like introduced me. She's like, hey, you want to try this? You ever tried this? And um at that point, um things got really bad. I got really addicted to cocaine, and it took over my life for at that point. I mean, alcohol and cocaine were like my best friends. And I mean, growing up, I didn't really ever, I think I never learned how to love anybody. So I was always, I never knew how to love. I never loved, and I was never loved, I felt like. So it made me just an angry person. And I felt like I always had to prove myself to somebody or defend myself. I didn't, ever learn that you're not supposed to do this. You're not supposed to, you know, you're not supposed to hit girls. You're not supposed to, hit every guy that looks at you wrong. Or so, like, that's what I grew up learning how to do. So I started getting in more trouble as an adult, getting assault charges and this and that. And, I'd be in the county for most of my 20s and, most of my 30s. Uh, still a really bad addict. It got worse and worse throughout the years. Um, going into my 30s, I hated my life. Like, I think more than anything, I was just, I already had my daughter by that point, but I wasn't really the greatest dad because I was just in and out of jail. Um, and addicted. I was imprisoned by my addiction. Couldn't get out of it. I felt like that was just who I was, I guess. Um, I think my daughter was like 3 years old when I hated my life so much that I tried to take my life. I remember I had cut my arm, and it was so bad that I cut every artery and vein in my arm. And it just so happens that there was an ambulance like right around the corner. Um, and I was so messed up. I was still trying to fight with them to leave me there to die. Um, and I remember sitting in the hospital. This was like around, I think it was Christmas Eve, because I remember waking up and my little baby was there, my daughter, waiting to open her presents, and I'm just sitting there, and I was happy to see her, but I was angry. I was really angry that I was alive. Um, I sat in that hospital, I think, for like 13, 14 days, and they just kept asking me, "How could you do this to yourself? Like your arm is like totally severed." And I told him, I was drunk. I played it off. I told him I was drunk, because if not, they were gonna send me somewhere. So I played it off, and they let me out. Eventually, I told them I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to see nobody. I didn't want to have no therapy, because of course, when you do something like that, they're gonna tell you, well, you need to see somebody, and I refused it. I And so I get out of the hospital, and here I am trying to I don't go to physical therapy. I don't follow through with any of the doctor's orders. I just self-medicated. At that point, now I'm getting hooked on pain pills and on cocaine and everything else, and my arm never healed right. It's still messed up, but the addiction went on. And I remember I stopped for a little bit trying to be a good father, trying to do the right thing. Probably about let's see, it was about the time I had my son. Um, and I was still mixed up in the same stuff, selling dope and using still. And I remember my son was born, and he had inhaled the fluids from his the placenta from his mom. So he inhaled all that stuff, and he almost died. And I remember they flight for lifed him to the hospital, and I was right there. I was one thing is I was there. I stood there every night with him. Um, and I remember that's when I started. I was asking, God, will you please help my son? I never really had a relationship with the Lord, but I think a lot of people in times like that, the one person you always will go to is God, even if you don't know Him. So my son ends up, you know, getting through that. He comes out strong. Um, and his mom, I think, she was she battled her own demons. Let's put it that way. She ended up taking off about after he was about 9 months old, and left me with both my kids. And I was still struggling with my own addiction, but I ended up getting in some trouble. A little bit after that, actually got on this in this an indictment with one of my other fellow brothers, and it was bad. It looked like this could get really bad. I actually had some people, PO that I had just started working with because I was already on getting started on probation. That they recommended that I try a program called Drug Court, and they said this will probably keep you from going to prison if you get accepted. And I said, well, this is what I need because like, I'm a single father, and I threw that single father role out there, and I ended up getting into the program, and I struggled through it. I remember I struggled through it so bad because it was intense, and telling me not to use like ever, like at all, was like I think I felt like it was probably impossible, but um I wish I could say that I did something good for my kids or I quit for my kids, but I couldn't. It was my addiction was, I guess at the time it was more important to me than anything else. I sad to say. Um yeah, it had me it overpowered me. Um I guess I was just too weak to fight it. I didn't have no faith. I think at the time I totally hated the Lord. I thought he forgot about me. Um yeah, I used to remember thinking that God forgot me, and I didn't care for anything people had to tell me about the Lord. Um anyway, I know I got through that program and I graduated it. Um I ended up getting the charge like 2 weeks after that program because I started using the day I got off. Um, Addiction had me. It had me bad. Um, it's I couldn't fight it. Um, and then this was already going into my 30s, mid 30s. Um, I remember I caught a DUI. It was 2016. That was my third DUI, and I remember bonding out of jail, and I I go out and I start drinking right after I get bonded out. And I'm drinking and driving. Almost wrecked my car. Anyway, I remember going to see the pre-trial guy the next day, and he's like, "Well, I'm gonna do a UA on you." And he's like, I was like, "Well, it's gonna be hot." And he didn't even give me a chance to do the UA. I remember he had me arrested that day, and I go back to jail. This is like 3 days later, and I bond back out, and here I am, like I'm like just dropping, a couple grand already there, and I go back to the same thing. I remember I was on my way to work, and I was parked at a red light, and a semi comes and crushes me from the back, and cops come and they're like, "Well, you're going to jail," and so I remember I went to jail that day. Like a $10,000 cash bond, and I was like, well, I don't think I'm going to get out this time. But I remember anyway. I remember going to court a couple times, and they changed my bond. I get out, and I was trying to do the right thing at that point. I was sober for a little bit, and I go. I remember going to court for sentencing, and I'm like, well, I'm a single father, and trying to play that same role, and I got my job, and I'm ready to go to this program, this DUI program, and the judge looks at me and he says, well, he's all maybe you should have thought about that stuff before you were out drinking and driving right after you bonded out and this and that. He's like, I'm gonna put you in jail right now for 6 months before you start your year work release. And I was like, really? Like, I'm going to lose my job? He's like, you didn't care about your job before. Why do you care now? And I remember going into jail. I was so angry. I was angry. Like, I didn't want to do anything. Like, I was fighting in there right away. I was doing hard time. Like, I was having a hard time. I wasn't doing a hard time, but I was having a hard time. Put it that way. They put me uh somehow I ended up in getting moved out to this county called Park County, which is like in Fairplay, Colorado, and there wasn't a whole lot to do there. So I remember I started getting into the Word. I started reading the Bible a lot. I started studying the Bible a lot, and I think that was kind of like my first real walk with the Lord. Like like I think a lot of people they go to jail and they bump into Jesus, and I started getting real into the Lord, and I go through this time, and like I get out, like I'm like quoting scripture, and I was serious, and everything was going good. I end up in the halfway house. I start working, and that's where I remember I met this girl, and I started to like her, and I start talking to her. And at this time, me and my supervisor, I remember we're doing Bible studies, and of course, this girl was married, and I started messing with her. And I remember my supervisor's like, "Hey, brother, you can't do this. She's married. That's adultery, man." And I thought about it and thought about it. So I remember going back and I told him, "You're right. I can't do this, man." And he's like, "You're gonna stop talking to her." He tells me. I was like, "Nah, man. I'm done. I'm done walking with the Lord, man." And I kept going with that relationship for a while, and then that's when I fell off. It wasn't but a couple months. I was deep back in my addiction, probably deeper than I've ever been. I lost my job, and I continue on with this woman and my addiction. My addiction, again, like I said, at its peak over throughout my life. It was at the peak during this time. I lost numerous jobs throughout the 5 years I was with this woman. Um, and I was getting some really good jobs because I've always been a good worker. I was always smart. I knew how to fix things. I was good with my hands. I remember towards the end, I mean, I lost some really good jobs, but I didn't care. I was addicted. I loved my addiction more than I loved anything. I think, it's sad to say, I love my children, and I love like my mom, and I love, I just, I've always, cared about all my family, but I think my addiction wouldn't let me, it wouldn't let me go. Um, I'm thinking, so it was what, January 14th, 2021. I had just lost another job, and this was a really good job. And at that point, this woman tells me, "You know what? I'm done with you. Don't come back home. We're done." And I think at that point, I was done. I was tired. I was sick and tired. And I took a bunch of pills. I took some Vicodins. I took like a full bottle of Tylenol. I took everything I found right there. And she finds me outside in the car, and was not very. I wasn't responsive. She takes me to the hospital, um, and they take me into the R, and I'm in and out at this point. I'm going in and out. Um, so yeah, she told me that I flatlined like 2 times, and I don't remember any of that, but um, yeah. So I flatlined a couple times there in the hospital, and I remember the doctor saying, "Hey, if you don't start breathing on your own," I know they Narcaned me a couple times, and they I remember little bits and pieces, and I remember waking up like a day later, all these tubes hooked up to me, and oxygen, and they're like, "Well, we have you on a M1 hold. You can't go anywhere, and we're going to send you to the Centennial Peaks Hospital." for M1 hold. That's a 72-hour hold. And, I go through all that and I get out. It's probably like 6 days later at this point. And I'm so sick in my addiction. I get out and I go and use again. Um, I think about it now. I was like, how sick was I? I was sick. I just died, and I'm over here using again. Um, I wasn't gonna let go. I felt like at this point, the only way out was to die. That's the way I felt at that point. Um, so it was a little bit later. I finally had got cleaned up. Um, and this is when I ran into my old therapist. And at this point, like I had already started to go back to church. I I remember going to I went over the years to another church, but it was always off and on. It was off and on, and I wasn't consistent about it. This was during my before I had met my ex, but it was this huge mega church, and it was just one of those things you don't. I couldn't get real close to the Lord. I felt like it wasn't intimate enough, I guess, for me. But my friend, a friend of mine, she's like, you need to come to my church, come check it out. So I had started going to New Hope Ministries of Central Denver, and I'd be off and on because like my addiction was still there. Um, but that's where I started. It planted the seed, and I started to think, okay, well, you know, maybe God hasn't forgotten about me. Maybe he knows who I am because he's left me here this amount of time through 2 attempted suicides, through all these years of addiction, through all this time in and out of jail. Thankfully, never went to prison. That was the one thing is I was really grateful for. I never went to prison. But maybe God has a plan for me. That's I started to see that. Um I would still fall here and there. But I was getting stronger. I was starting to believe in myself, and I don't know. It was just something about the people at this church, this New Hope Ministries of Central Denver. I felt like I belonged. Finally, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Because going on through my life, I never felt like I belonged anywhere. I used to think the only place I belonged was either going to be in prison for life or 6 feet under. Going through my life, that I felt like that was the only 2 options I had. And after I started to get more to build my relationship with the Lord, things started to get a little bit better. Um, so it was around the summer of 2022. I bump into my old therapist who I still kept in contact with, and I'm sober at this time. And I ask him, "Hey, is the jail letting people go and volunteer going into the jail?" And he tells me, "Well, actually hiring somebody." So I was like, he tells me, "You should apply because they're looking for somebody that has lived experience." And I was like, "Really?" And at the time, it wasn't. I don't know if it was for me. I was like, "I don't know, man. I don't even think why would they let me in there? Like I've been in there so many times. Why would they let me go work in the jail?" Um, but my faith was already getting strong at this point. So I go home. I remember I pray about it, and as about a month passes by, I go and apply, and because the Lord, I knew I always had a purpose, and I know the Lord always kept me here, and maybe it was to help other people. Maybe it was to be able to share my life experience to somebody else to show them that somebody could change. If I change, you could change. So I apply, and I'm going through interviews. I remember, and I remember I felt so weird going into the jail for an interview, and I had the enemy in my ear telling me, "You ain't gonna get this job. What are you thinking? What are you even doing here?" But I know, I at this point, my faith was so strong. I knew that God had me here for a reason, and I ended up getting the job. And in the beginning, it's just like people would see me in the jail. It's like, "What are you doing here?" The guards would see me like, "What are you doing in here? Who let you in here?" And it's like, I don't know what I'm doing here, to be honest with you. But um, so I end up in this unique position that I'm like the guinea pig of this position. Nobody has ever done this position. I'm working in the jail, doing peer support for reentry for people going back into the community. And this is about, I say, about 6 months in, and my faith at this point is it's super strong. Um, I remember I was my health was not the greatest. I was heavy, and I remember I was coughing one day. I was had a cough or something. I break 2 ribs, and it's just like an excruciating pain, right? I'm going a couple days. I don't go to the hospital or anything. I was like, maybe it's just maybe I just slept wrong on my side or whatever. Eventually, it was so bad. I go to the hospital, and the doctor told me I got 2 broken ribs. So okay, and they give me this script for OxyContin, and I told myself I'm not going to take these pills no matter what. So here we go. I'm not sleeping. I'm uh, not having a good time. So finally, I start. I take a couple of these pills, uh, and it started like I'm going about a month and a half, and I'm missing work. I'm getting super depressed, and it wasn't like depressed like it used to be because I still have my faith in God, but it was to the point where I was getting close to losing my job. This job that I worked so hard to get into. Um, and so I remember that day. I dropped to my knees and I pray and I tell God, I need you now more than ever. I need you to help me get through this. Um, I don't want to go back. I'm here for a reason. I know you put me here for a reason, God. And I think from that point, I I ask him to help to heal me. I ask him to get me through this, to get me out of this depression I'm going through. And I say within the next day or two, my ribs start to feel like literally they start to feel better. I feel like nothing is even there anymore. And that's where I suited up, put on the armor of God, and I started to battle. I had my teenage son. He's struggling too at this time, and I remember I sit with him. I'm about a week without any like I was sober at the time, but I was like a week completely sober because I remember I was taking the pills, the OxyContin for pain, and for me, even though it was prescribed, I said this is to me it's not sober. So anyway, I'm sitting there with my son. I remember, and I told him, "Look, son, I know I haven't been the best father to you, and I want to show you what it's like to be a godly man and the leader in this home, and I want you to start to follow me." Because I was never a good example to him before that. And I'm starting to see how that was affecting him. But that was a little over a year ago. Um without any substance in my body. Um, which that's an accomplishment for me because I think the only other time I had been sober when I was locked up throughout my life, pretty much. But I know with the Lord, everything and all things are possible. If you brought a drug addict like me that didn't care, that was, just bound by his addiction and by had no, it was aimless. I had no life. If he could save a person like me, he could save anybody. Today, today, I've been at my job for like a year and a half. Um, and I just keep moving forward. I started going back to school to get my degree so I could just keep moving forward. And I just keep moving forward. I try to be the biggest inspiration I can to the people around me. Um, but my inspiration is my Lord and Savior. Because I know He's the one that saved me. He pulled me out of the hell that I was in, and I'll never forget that. I always to God be all the glory that I am becoming the man that I am today.